Everyone. My name is Kiera. If we haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, I am one of the program associates on the tax team with the cash campaign. I'm very excited to be doing this amendment training with everyone today. And I'm also very excited for everyone who's going to be working with the back tax program. We have a lot more volunteers participating this year, so it's very exciting. So thank you for taking the time to join. All right. Just make sure. Okay. So as always, we want to make sure we remind everyone that we do have a resource site. So please feel free to use this site whenever it'll have the recorded sessions to all of our trainings, including this one. It'll have the slides that we cover. It'll have the scenarios. So it's very useful. There are also other resources on there outside of just tax training material. So please make sure you take advantage of this website. The password, if you're ever prompted to enter one, is 1040. So feel free to. Somebody was joining. Okay. All right, so what we're going to be covering today in this session are amended returns, obviously. We're also going to go over requesting transcripts. So during back taxes, and particularly when you're doing prior year returns or amendments, you often have to rely on transcripts. So we want to make sure that everybody knows what those various transcripts are, how to request them. And then we'll get into some scenario practice. We have 3 scenarios. The first 2 we'll definitely have plenty of time for. And the third one, if we run out of time, that'll just be extra practice for you all. And we can post a walkthrough if necessary. So first things first, we're going to cover amended returns. So you're probably wondering, what is an amended return? An amended return is a tax form that is filed to correct any errors that were made on the original tax return. So we have an X that we use to delineate amended returns from the original return. So for example, your original federal return is called a Form 1040, but when you amend that, it becomes a Form 1040X. And then for the Maryland return, the original return is called a Maryland 502 form, but an amended return is a Maryland Form 502X. Up to 3 amendments can be filed for the same tax year. So I personally have not filed a secondary or third amendment for someone, but you can file multiple amendments. You know, if the first amendment does have an additional error that needs to be corrected, you can file an additional amendment. All right, so when is an amendment not needed? Every return that has an error does not need to be amended. So situations where an amendment would not be needed is if there is an arithmetic or mathematical error. The IRS knows that the tax code is confusing. If someone makes a small mathematical error, the IRS will normally catch that when processing the return, and they will fix that for you. If they do make any type of adjustment to the return, they do send a letter to the taxpayer to notify them of the adjustment. And so an amendment is typically not needed for those types of errors. Another time an amendment is not needed is if a form or schedule was not attached. This typically happens if someone's mailing in a return, if they're paper filing, and let's say they forget to attach their Schedule C. They've claimed some business loss, but the Schedule C is not there. The IRS might send a letter and correspond with the client saying, hey, please send in your Schedule C. So that doesn't require an amended return. You just have to send in the additional schedule. Another time is if, you know, I've had clients inquire about, hey, I just moved, I want to update my mailing address. You do not need to amend a return to update a mailing address. That's not necessary. And then we have this note here about taxpayers who have ITINs. So if a taxpayer has an ITIN and then, you know, a year later they receive a Social Security card, if a prior year return is being amended, you should not use that Social Security number. You should be using the ITIN. And so you would just want to make sure if you're ever in the situation like this, you're doing it correctly because you don't want to get somebody in trouble. So you cannot use a Social Security number to retroactively claim the earned income credit. All right, so when is an amendment actually needed? There are a few instances. So we're going to go through the various reasons why an amendment might be needed. The first is if there's going to be a change in the filing status. So if someone's changing, for example, from married filing separate to head of household, maybe they didn't realize they qualified for the exemption to be considered unmarried for tax purposes, and they find out later and decide to amend the return. A change in income. This happens often. The cash sites are open as early as the day after MLK Day. And so because of that, a lot of clients file before they have all their documents, and they might receive an additional income statement, such as a W-2, after filing the original return. Another instance would be if there's a change in deductions. So for example, if you're going from the standard to the itemized deduction, let's say a taxpayer forgot to include their mortgage interest statement, and they could have itemized, they might want to file an amendment for that. Credits, so if a client claims a credit that they shouldn't have, or if they forgot to claim a credit that they were eligible for, an amendment is necessary to get that credit. And then a change in tax liability. So for example, if the tax bill increases after there's a change in income, an amendment would be necessary. I just want to add this quick note. I have not personally encountered this type of situation, but it is important to know. So after the due date of the original return, a taxpayer can change their filing status from married filing separate to married filing joint, but they cannot change from married filing joint to married filing separate after the due date of a return. So just keep that in mind. And then, of course, the most common reason, which I mentioned earlier, is a change in income. So, an income statement being omitted. All right, so you have two situations. So an amendment will either result in a refund or it'll result in a balance due. If an amendment results in a refund, you should be advising clients to wait until the original return is processed before amending to avoid processing delays. So this is especially true for the current tax year. If a client comes in and they're going to get a refund, you should wait. We shouldn't really have to worry about that at this point because it's back taxes, but it's just important to note. Interest is added onto refunds by the IRS. This is not something we calculate. The IRS will calculate this. But if an amended return yields a decrease in the original balance and the original tax was already paid, or an increase in the original refund, the IRS will pay interest on that as long as it was not processed within 45 days of the return's due date. If an amendment results in a balance due, so the client has to pay money, you should advise the client to file the amendment as soon as possible, because, if they end up filing after the deadline, there will be penalties and interest that will start to accrue on the balance. So they should file as soon as possible. All right, and so as I just mentioned, there's the risk of penalties and interest. And so you just want to advise clients to file as soon as possible, even if they can't afford to pay by the due date. There is a time limit to claim a refund. So I'm sure most people are familiar with this already. You have 3 years to claim a refund if after the original return was filed, or within 2 years after the date the tax was paid, whichever is later. If you wait after that 3-year window, the refund becomes the property of the U.S. Treasury. So they won't issue the refund. They just keep it. Returns filed before the due date without regard to extensions are considered filed on the due date. There are some scope limitations around amendments. Of course, an advanced certification is required. Amendments that are not in, original returns that are not in scope and they're not brought in scope by filing an amended return, those remain out of scope. So if someone comes in with a return that is out of scope, however, by us filing the amended return, it brings it back in scope, then we can do that. But if it remains out of scope after the amendment would be filed, whatever correction they're making, then we have to refer them to a professional tax preparer. Same thing goes for if a taxpayer might qualify for an exemption to the 3-year time limit. There are a few examples. I have a hyperlink here if you want to look into that. But I'm not going to cover those. But if sometimes a taxpayer might qualify for an exception, and if that happens, if you suspect that they do, you should refer them to a professional tax preparer. All right, so this is what the 1040X looks like. Looks a lot different than the original return. There are 3 columns, and I'm going to explain what each one means. So column A is the original amount. So that is where the original figures or the IRS adjusted figures, if the IRS sent a letter to the taxpayer notifying them of a change, this is where that information is listed. So whatever was on the original return will be listed in column A. Column B is the change. So whatever has been adjusted, whether it be the income or the deduction, this is where the adjustments will go. So column B is the net change. And then column C is what would be, the correct amount had the return been prepared correctly the first time. Okay, on page 2 of the 1040X, there are 2 sections. So part 1 is the dependent section. If a taxpayer is adjusting, so increasing or decreasing the number of dependents on the return, this is where that information would be listed. This section is only completed if there's an adjustment to the dependents. And then part 2 is the explanation of changes. This is required for all amended returns. You have to explain why the return is being amended. And on the next slide, you'll see that the explanation should be they should be clear, easy to understand, and they should clearly point out, why the taxpayer qualifies for the change that's being made on the return. So I'm going to show a couple of examples just so that it's clear on what is sufficient and what is not. So we're going to start out with some examples that are not good enough. If, let's say someone gets another W-2 and you just put added income on the explanation. That's not good enough. It's not being very clear on what change. You're saying the income, but what type of income. And then if you've put something like forgot to claim a credit. So let's say we have a taxpayer who, didn't realize that their 1098-T should go on their return and that could possibly allow them to claim an education credit. And you just say forgot to claim a credit as the explanation. That's not explaining what the credit is that's being added to the return. It's not explaining clearly why the taxpayer is eligible for that credit. So these are not very good examples. Some good examples, so alternatives to the bad examples that we just saw would be, they have extra income that was not reported on the original return. We would say something like the taxpayer received an additional W-2 after they filed the original return and the W-2 is attached. And then for, a credit that was not claimed on the original return, we could say something like the taxpayer qualifies for the child independent care credit. They incurred $600 of child care expenses for their 10-year-old dependent. And for Form 2441 has been attached. So there are some required documents when someone's amending their return. There are the obvious things like the Form 13614C that's required by all clients. We also still need a Social Security card and photo ID. And then the original tax documents. So these are the standard things. Some additional documents that we're going to need when amending a return would be the original tax return, so the 1040 that was filed and accepted. And then we also want the original state returns that were filed and accepted if a state amendment is being prepared as well, which typically, if you're amending the federal, you will likely be amending the state. If the taxpayer received any letters from the IRS, such as, a notice saying we've made a change on your return, we will need that because when we go to amend the return, we'll want to put in that IRS adjusted figure. And then this last one, IRS transcripts, we're going to go over that a bit more later, but if a taxpayer doesn't have an original document, they can't get it, and we've tried other ways, then we might have them request a transcript. Okay, so there are 2 processes. So we either have an existing client that already has filed the original return with us in our software, and then we have new clients. We're going to start with the existing clients. So if we have an existing client, and I'll be showing screenshots of what this looks like in TaxSlayer, you're going to want to just search for the client in TaxSlayer and print the original return before making any changes. So that's the first thing we should be doing because we want to make sure once we make any type of change, it's going to adjust the the PDF of the return. So make sure you're printing it. The next thing you'll do is enter the client's return and then select the tax year amended return option on the left-hand menu. And then they put in the original 1040 information. Usually this is automatically populated if the client has already had their return accepted in our software. But you're still going to want to make sure you're checking this information because again, there could be IRS adjustments as indicated on letters, or, the software might have just transported some information incorrectly. So just always make sure you're checking anything that auto-populates in TaxSlayer. Next, you're going to want to select Make Correction. So this will take you back to the main menu in TaxSlayer, and you'll just make any adjustments as if you were preparing the return originally. And then you'll proceed to the State Amendment section and then add an explanation. So this is what it would look like in TaxSlayer. You would go to Client Search, find the return, this taxpayer, you're going to go and select the print icon and then print the return. Then you'll enter the return. Once you've entered the return, you see on the left-hand menu, there is that amended return option. This one is from 2024. So you just select that and then hit Get Started. It'll ask you, are you sure you want to amend the return? Then there's a series of options to select from. There is that first one, how to amend your return. If you ever forget, feel free to click on that. It'll show you the order of operations. But the first thing we're going to want to do is click on the original federal information that, like I said, if the client has already had their return accepted in our software, it'll automatically populate. We should be checking that. So in this example, you see the various line items that this software is requesting us to enter. And then these are the lines that you can find each of those, that information on. You'll notice that it says, where is this located? If you click on that, it'll remind you where you can find this on the 1040 if you're ever unsure about where that is located. And then same thing over here. Then you also have the option to adjust the dependents or the address or the presidential election campaign fund. So if any of that applies, just check the box. And then if someone wants their refund to be applied to the next year's estimated tax payments, if that seems applicable for the taxpayer, you can ask them and enter in the amount there. After you've done that, after you put in the original information, you're going to want to move on to making corrections. So once you select that, it'll let you know we're taking you back to the main menu. And then from here, you'll just make any adjustments that need to be made. So let's say they're adding another W-2. You'd go into the W-2 section, add the W-2, and then return to this amended tax return screen. From there, you'll then amend the state return. So you'll click Begin. There's a lot of clicking when you get to the state portion. So we hit Amend State Return. Then we have to hit Amend State. I'm using Maryland as an example because most of the time, if you find yourself doing an amendment for a state, it'll most likely be Maryland. You then have to scroll down to the bottom of the menu and select Amended Return. And then you have to pick whether you're going to do a 502X for either a resident or part year resident of Maryland, or a 505X for non-resident returns. Once you select that, it'll take you into this menu. It looks very similar to the federal section. So you just need to answer some questions. All of these sections should be entered except for one. So this itemized deduction section should only be completed if the taxpayer itemized on the original return. Most of our clients take the standard deduction, so usually you're not going to find yourself in this section too often, but everything else should be completed. So for that first section, general questions, it's just going to ask you a few questions that you need to answer, such as is the amended return for the federal return being filed? Has the original federal return been changed by the IRS? What's the filing status on the original return? And you just get this information from the return. Then the next section will be very similar to the federal portion. You're entering in what was on the original Form 1040. And then you'll enter information from the original Maryland 502, so the original Maryland return. And The state is a little bit more easy, like more user friendly. It'll list the line item that you need and it's very clear. So you don't have to, go searching around on the form or click the where is this located. It's already listed right here for you. And then for the explanations, typically you're going to want to say yes. Usually, the reason for the state amendment is the same for the federal amendment return. So you can say yes, and it'll just pull over whatever explanation you use on the federal return, and you won't end up having to enter anything. However, if we're amending just a state return, or if the reason that we're amending the state return is different than the reason we're amending the federal return, you're going to want to say no, and then add the explanation on the lines below. So an example of that would be, let's say we're amending a return because the Maryland state pickup was not correctly indicated when the W-2 was entered, and this impacted the addition to the income on the state return. You would just say something like the Maryland State Pickup Addition to Income of $4,203 was not included on the original return. This has been corrected and the corresponding W-2 has been attached. All right, when you get back to this, once you've completed the state amended return, you'll want to go back to the amended return on the federal section and then enter in the explanation for the change. I have an example here, very similar to the one we went over earlier. You just put in whatever the reason is here. This is required. Like I said, on Maryland, you can just pull it over, but you have to enter it here no matter what. And then once you've done that, you're always going to want to review a PDF of the return. So we know that TaxSlayer can be sensitive sometimes, if you forget to check a button or you don't do something in the right order, it can throw off what's pulled over to the amended return. So always print the return, look at the PDF, and just make sure everything makes sense. All right, and then once you've done all of that, you can proceed with e-filing the amendment. This finishing the return is very similar to a regular return. The main difference is once you click on that e-file section, it will ask you to pick between the original return and the amended return. And of course, when we're doing an amended return, we want to select amended tax return. All right, so that was the process for if the client's existing in our software already. As I mentioned before, if we have a new client, it's just a little bit different. So the way to start that would be, this is a new client. They don't have any return in our system already. So we're going to need to treat them like a regular appointment. They come in, they fill out the 13614C, and then what we're going to want to do is create a return for them. So we need to start a return in TaxSlayer, and then we're going to prepare the return as normal with all of the documents, including the amended information. I know some site managers who like to recreate the return as it is on the original return and then go in and make corrections. But in the 4012, they say that it's okay to just go ahead and prepare the return as normal, including the amended information as well. And then once you've done that, you can go ahead and follow the order of operations that we've already gone through. So you would select the amended return on the left-hand menu and then enter in the original 1040 information. Since the return hasn't been filed, this is a new client. It won't populate for you after you've entered everything in. You're going to have to go in and manually enter in those the items from the original return. So just make sure you're doing that. And then if you're someone who likes to recreate the original return and then amend the return, that's fine. If you end up doing that, you'll go to make corrections. But if you've already included everything that needs to be on the return, you can skip that step. And then you'll proceed to the state amendment section if necessary, following the same steps we went over before, and then add the explanation for the amended return. Sometimes, I know I did this when I first started doing taxes. Sometimes you might accidentally click on the amended return option because it's right under the e-file page. Or, you might start to do an amendment and realize the amendment wasn't actually necessary and you want to go and delete the amended return. You just hit delete amended return. Once you select that begin button, it will automatically delete the 1040X. But if you've started a state amended return, it will not delete the state return. So what you're going to need to do is go back into that state, in this case, Maryland, and then you'll select the icon on the right-hand side, and then you'll select delete. So that will then delete the state amended return. All right. So how to file an amended return. Most amendments, so if it's within 3 years, can be e-filed, federal amendments specifically. So that would be the current year and 2 preceding years. So for this tax year, that'd be 2022 through 2024. Any other years, if you're amending them, must be paper filed, and we'll go over what to do when you need to paper file an amendment. And then there's a new option this year. Previously, in previous years, we were not able to e-file state amended returns, but that has become an option this year. However, I personally have had a difficult time e-filing Maryland amendments. Usually it gets a reject. The software, I don't know if it's a glitch or if something needs to be fixed. I'm not quite sure what the issue is. But there is the option to select e-file. I'd be careful with this until we successfully e-file a state return. I do prepare a paper copy for the client to mail in the event that the software is not allowing the state amendment to go through. So just be aware of that. So if we do have to paper file the amended return, there are a few reasons other than the tax year being, too old to e-file. And that would include if the original return was filed by paper, if the primary or spouse social security number is different from the one provided on the original return, the original return was filed as surviving spouse, or if your site did not prepare the original return and you're not able to recreate the original e-filed return with all the documents provided. And this can be found in the Pub 4012 on page M4. In order to paper file an amended return, you're going to need to make sure you're including all the correct documents. So there's a chart here, which you can also find in the 4012 on page M8. But essentially, when mailing an amended return, you're going to want to print 3 copies of the 1040X. So that's the federal amended return. 1 copy should be mailed to the IRS. 1 should be mailed to the state. And then 1 should be provided to the taxpayer as a copy for them to keep for their records. You'll notice that when we do amended returns, they also print something that says 1040 and then it says amended at the top. That is just for the taxpayer. You do not need to include that with what you're mailing to the IRS or the comptroller. When you're mailing amended returns, you're also going to want to include any additional schedules or forms that have been added or changed. So that should go to the IRS, to the state, and then a copy should be provided to the taxpayer. If you are doing a state amended return, you're going to want to print the state copy to go to the state and then a copy to go with the taxpayer. A copy of the state does not need to go to the IRS. And then, of course, any additional income statements that are being added to the return should be included in the paper filing. This shows where you're going to mail the return. So it's for anyone living in Maryland, it's going to be that Department of the Treasury, Internal Revenue Service, Kansas City, Missouri address. However, if they received an IRS notice saying that they should amend the return, there's going to be an address provided on that notice, and that's where they should mail the return instead. So if they receive an IRS notice, they should send it to the address on the notice. If they don't, this other address is appropriate. And then for state amended returns, they should mail it to the Comptroller of Maryland amended return unit. Amended returns that are e-filed can be tracked. I believe if they're paper filed as well, you can still use this. But you do need to give it a little bit before you try using it to track the amended return. Amended returns take a long time to process. So they say allow up to 16 weeks, which is 4 months. Sometimes it can be longer. I've had clients tell me that, it's taken longer than the 16 weeks. Please make sure you're setting expectations. So when a client comes in and is getting an amended return, whether it's e-filed or paper filed, it will take a minimum of this amount of time before they see, any refund that they might be getting from the amended return. This is just a quick note. We don't see this too often, but on occasion, you might find yourself doing a return where it's a married filing joint return and someone is an injured spouse. If you're not familiar with what an injured spouse is, it's not a physical injury. It's more like a financial injury. So let's say we have a married couple and one of the taxpayers has back child support. That's a common one that I've seen in the past, or, a prior year tax obligation that the other spouse is not obligated to pay. The person who's not obligated to pay the debt is considered an injured spouse, and they can attach what's called a Form 8379 to allocate their portion of the income and therefore protect their portion of the refund from being captured by the IRS or the comptroller. If someone is coming in and amending a return where the form should have been completed but was not completed, you do not need to amend the return. You would simply complete the form for them, and then they should mail it in. Or if they do have a return where the form, the injured spouse form was completed and the amendment results in a larger refund, we would want to complete a brand new Form 8379. So that's just a note. You're probably not going to run into this, but I just wanted to include it in here. All right. So that concludes the run through of an amended return. Do we have any questions?
Yes. If
Yes.
you add a W-2 and you go through the whole process and e-file it, is it automatically attached to the return, the amended
Yes.
return? Okay.
Yes. Any other questions?
For prior year returns, do we have to have been certified in that year?
Great question. No, you do not. You'll want to make sure we should be providing 4012s for that year in case there are any, tax law changes, but you do not have to have been certified in that tax year. Any other questions? All right, so if there are no other questions, we'll move into the transcripts portion of the presentation. So as I mentioned before, we're dealing with prior year returns, and oftentimes, I'll say it's like more like 50-50, or at least a third of the time, clients don't have the original documents, and we have to help them with the process of requesting a transcript. So we're going to go over what those are and how to get them. So there are 5 types of transcripts, and these are all IRS transcripts, by the way. There are account transcripts, tax return transcripts, a record of account transcripts, wage and income transcripts, and then a verification of non-filing letter. An account transcript, which is shown on the screen here, shows basic data like such as a filing status, the taxable income from that tax year, and then like a payment history. So any transaction that's happened on the return. So for example, it might be difficult to see, but some of the transactions here on this return where it's including the date that the return was filed, and then the date that the refund was issued. Let's say the taxpayer owed money and they made a few payments, a few monthly payments. It would show the dates that those payments were made and the amount that was made. So this can be really helpful if we're doing an amended return and a taxpayer says, hey, I paid some of that, but I don't remember how much. You could have them request an account transcript for that year to see what payments have been made, which could help us when completing the amended return. Tax return transcripts are pretty much what they say in their name. They're a transcript of what was included on the original tax return. So we don't prefer to use the tax return transcripts. The original tax return is better. But if we can't get that, a tax return transcript can be used for us to pull over the information that was on the original return. It's important to know that this doesn't show any changes that you might have made after the return was filed. And this is only available for the current year and 3 prior years. Wage and income transcript, which is the type of transcript you'll work with the most. We also have a scenario that includes a wage and income transcript. This is what we're going to use if a taxpayer has misplaced their W-2s or other income statements, such as their 1099s, or even their 1098-Ts or a 1098 student loan interest statement. This will include all the information that has been reported to the IRS. And this is available for the current year and 9 prior years. There are 2 others. So there's a record of account transcript. What that does is it just combines the tax return transcript and the account transcript into one complete transcript. And that's available for the current year and 3 prior years. And then we also have the verification of non-filing letter. This simply just confirms that there is no record of a return being filed. It doesn't specify whether or not a return was actually required to be filed, but it just confirms that there is no record of a return on file. And this can be helpful. Sometimes we have clients who come in and they're not sure whether or not they actually filed. You can go have them create an IRS account and see if one of these transcripts are there. This is only available for the current year and 3 prior years as well. All right, so there are a few ways to request IRS transcripts. The first way, and what I personally think is the easiest way, it's also the fastest way, is to go online. Clients can create an IRS account through ID.me. There is a walkthrough video. I think it's a pretty straightforward process. Maybe that's just because I've done it a lot, but it takes about 10 minutes. The client needs to have a smartphone and they need to have their ID with them. They're going to have to upload a picture of the front and back of their ID, as well as take a video selfie. And this is just to verify their identity. I personally think all back tax clients should have this, but you know. We also can request transcripts in person. You can visit your local IRS office, so a taxpayer assistance center, and request it in person. You'll need an appointment if you're going to do this, and then you have to wait. I'm not sure if they print it for you. They might be able to print it for you that same day, but typically clients will have to have it mailed. All right, and then you can also request it through the mail. So you can complete what's called a Form 4506T, and then you can request the various types of transcripts and, state which year you need it for and send that in the mail. There's a fourth way, which I'll talk about on a later slide. All right, so if you decide to use the online account, the ID.me account, to have a taxpayer pull their transcript, please know that it will be masked. So it'll be partially redacted, meaning that we will probably not have the full EIN. If we are unable to provide the full EIN on the return, we won't be able to e-file it. So it is a good practice to try to get the EIN. Without it, it'll have to be mailed in. If you are using a mass transcript, there are a few options that you have to try to retrieve the EIN. The first is a state transcript. So federal transcripts don't have any state information. If you're going to use a wage and income transcript to do a return, you're also going to have the client get a transcript from the Comptroller of Maryland. Apparently, the Comptroller doesn't even call it transcripts. I've heard some people say screenshots or printouts. We'll talk more about that later. But if you get the state transcript, it usually has all the information on it. You can just pull it from there. Another tool is the EIN search tool, which is hyperlinked here. So when these slides are shared with you, you'll have access to that. And then another option is to do a Google search. So I'm just going to show you what it would look like if you're using a transcript. So in this example, the taxpayer has a 1099 INT, and you'll see that the EIN is partially redacted. If you're using the EIN search tool, you'll just search the name. It gave us just CQ. We happen to know that CQ Credit Union, and the EIN is there. And you'll notice that the last 4 that are provided on the transcript happen to match what's in the EIN search tool, and you can move forward using that EIN. If you're requesting a transcript in person, you're going to need an appointment. This is the only way to get an unmasked, so a transcript that's not redacted, but you have to specifically request it. To find the one nearest you or nearest a taxpayer, you can use the Taxpayer Assistance Center office locator on the IRS website and just, put in the mile radius, how far you're willing to go, and your zip code, and it'll pull up the ones closest to you. It'll also include information on how you can schedule the appointment with that particular location and their hours of operation. If you're going to request it by mail, Form 4506T, this is what it looks like. You just complete the information with, your social security number, your name, your address. And then on the bottom part of the form, you'll check off what transcript you're requesting and then list the years that you need it for. This takes, I believe they say 10 business days after the form's been received and processed. So it is not the quickest way. Online is really the preferred method, and then next I would say you could send clients to the IRS office, which for our location, it happens to be about a 10-minute walk from here. All right, the fourth way that I didn't highlight earlier, but I do want to just briefly mention now is to request it over the phone. There is an automated self-help service tool. That's the number there on the screen. If you're going to use this method, just know that it's limited. It only allows you to request the tax return and account transcripts for the current and 3 prior years. So if you need a wage and income transcript, this is probably not the best way to go. And as I mentioned before, IRS transcripts don't have any state information, so you're going to need to send the client to the comptroller's office. You do not need an appointment to go to the local comptroller's office. You can just walk in that same day and get them printed out for you that same day. This is also a very short walk from our office, so oftentimes clients will come in, they'll do all the work to get the federal transcripts, but they won't have the state transcripts. We usually just send them down the street to go get that. They just need to be able to provide a form of ID because that's the way that you're checked in. So they ask for your ID when you get there, and then they put you on a list, and then when it's your turn, they call you up and you can get an original return printed for you, a copy of the original return, and then a copy of the transcripts with the income statement information. Another way to get is by mailing in Form 129, but I personally just send everyone to the local office. I haven't had anyone fill out a form yet. All right, and then if you're amending a state return for a state that isn't Maryland, you'll wanna, and they don't have the original documents and they need, to request a copy of something, you're gonna have to consult that state's tax department to figure out how they can get that information. All right, any questions on the transcripts or amended returns?
So if they have to go to the Hopkins Plaza, well, last year I would just send them there, but that doesn't
Yep.
work. They have to have an appointment.
So thank you for bringing that up, Liz. Yeah, they're supposed to have an appointment, right? But personally, I send clients there as well. If depending on when they go, the time of the day, and I can only speak to the one that's nearest here. So like Liz mentioned, the 31 Hopkins Plaza address. Sometimes they can get the transcript that same day and come back to our office. Other times they're told that they have to make an appointment. Officially, they have to make an appointment, but you may send someone over there as a walk-in and just let them know, just give them that expectation. You're supposed to have an appointment. You might be turned away. But yeah, sometimes you are able to just walk in and get it. Any other questions? Okay. So with that said, we have a 10-minute break built in before we move into our practice scenarios. So feel free to take a break and just come back at 1 o'clock. You guys could not see the screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen as it's showing here? It should say let's practice.
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. All right, so we have 3 returns, 3 scenarios that are brand new. So I don't think any of you have worked, well, none of you should have worked with these before. So we've got Calvin Calvert. I kept with Lucy's alliteration, by the way. Calvin Calvert, who received an additional tax document after filing. Then we have Howard Hamden, who is changing his filing status, adding 2 dependents, and claiming an additional credit. So you'll get experience with, doing an amendment where someone's adjusting their filing status and the number of dependents. And then we have Tyler Talbot. He's just receiving an additional tax document, but the catch here is he lost his W-2, so he's going to be using the wage and income transcript as opposed to the original documents. So the first one we're going to work with is Calvin Calvert. Madison was kind enough to email the scenarios to all of you for me. Please let us know in the chat if you did not receive that email, so we can get the scenarios to you. They are not yet up on our resource page. So if you go to the resource page, you will not find them there. All right, so the way that we're going to work with these scenarios is by logging into the practice lab. So please visit vita.taxslayerpro.com. Select Practice Lab. The password for that is TrainProWeb, and then you'll sign into the account that you used during training. So not the username and password that you used for the live software during tax season, but the Practice Lab account that you made during training season. So I'll give everybody a few moments to get logged into that and to get the Calvin Calvert scenario pulled up on their screen. I'm also going to pull it up on mine.
What's the website again?
Yep, it's vita.taxslayerpro.com. We can put it in the chat to make it easier for you guys. And Carolyn, you need us to send you guys the scenarios.
There's Madison. Madison, could you resend the scenarios to them so Kira can share a screen?
Yep, for sure. Sorry, I was trying to put it in the chat, but I can't find the attachment, so I can go ahead and just email them.
I can try and figure out too. And Megan wants them as well. Cash team is so excited to learn how to do amendments.
Let's walk through our interview notes with our taxpayer, Calvin. So we've got Calvin, who's nearing retirement. He works 2 part-time jobs. It was a hard year, and he had to receive unemployment benefits for a few months and withdraw funds from his retirement account. During Calvin's initial tax appointment, he had only received his 2 W-2s, one 1099-R, a 1099-G from unemployment, and that's it. He brought all these documents to his appointment and was positive that that was all he needed to do his 2024 tax return. 2 days after filing, Calvin received another 1099-R. He was worried and called his tax preparer for another appointment, but was told that amendments cannot be filed before the April 15th deadline. That's a lie. Calvin looked out and was able to schedule an appointment with his local VITA site a week after his return was filed. He provided his original tax returns as well as the original tax documents. The additional 1099-R that was not included on the original return has a gross distribution of $29,823.57. And Calvin's worried about owing back some or all of his initial refund. He had health insurance through the state of Maryland for free. He's not going to be making any changes to his filing status or his dependents. He didn't have any to start. He won't be adding any. And he has not received any letters regarding his return from the IRS. And as of the morning of the appointment, so we'll consider that today, Calvin has not yet received his federal refund of $1,090, but he has received his state refund of $235. All right, so those are our notes. Before we get started with going through that in TaxSlayer, there are a couple of questions that we can answer. So based on the information provided by Calvin in the interview notes, is an amendment needed and why? And that's for anybody
Yes,
to answer.
because he
Yes.
received the 1099-R
Yeah,
that
he
initially
received
didn't have.
exactly. He received an additional income statement, so there's going to be a change to his income. So yes, he does need an amendment. And that's just that question, the purpose of that question is just to practice with the explanation. Second question, if Calvin's amended return results in a balance due, should the amendment be filed right away or should he wait until he receives both of his refunds? Remember, he's only received the state refund so far.
If he can afford it, he could do it now.
Okay.
But they're probably they want the balance due paid with the amended return, right?
Yes. Does everyone agree with Dan? I think that was.
Can you repeat that one more time, please? Thanks.
He doesn't need to wait unless he has to get the refund money in hand to pay his balance due.
So yes, so because if you remember, he's filing a week after the initial return was submitted. So it's been a week between the original submission. So he hasn't gotten his federal refund yet. Most likely, since it's such a significant shift in his income, he probably is going to owe back some or all of his refund. So the advice to him should be to file as soon as possible because the amendment's going to result in a balance due. And if you remember from before, if the amendment's going to result in a balance due, they should be advised to do the return as soon as possible, even if the original return has not yet been processed. And the reason for that is because if he waits to receive the refund, and then let's say it's cutting it close to the deadline, you know, he might end up filing the amendment and not paying before the April 15th deadline, and he'll be subjected to, you know, penalties and interest on that balance due. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Let me know if it doesn't in the chat. Okay, so we have the ID and the social security card. We have an intake. Rob says yes. Great, thanks, Rob. We have our intake sheet here completed. And then we also have the original tax documents. So he mentioned 2 W-2s. We have those here. We have the 1099-R. There should be another one in here. We have a 1099-G for the unemployment. And then it looks like this is the 1099-R that was left off of the original return. And then if you remember, we also need the original tax return. So this is the return that was already filed. We have our 1040 here, which we're going to need when we get to the amended portion. And then we have our original Maryland Form 502. So the first thing that we're going to want to do, since this is not someone that we've worked with before, it's a new client, we're going to need to create a return in TaxSlayer. So if everyone can go into their practice lab, we're working with the 2024 tax year. You're going to want to start a new return since this is a new client. So go ahead and start a return. Would it be helpful? I think everyone should be able to prepare the return without me walking through that. So I'll give you guys 15 minutes to prepare the return. You're not going to be doing the amended portion just yet. Just go ahead and enter in all of these documents as if you're preparing the return for the first time. Don't worry about clicking on the amended section yet. So just go ahead, create a return for Calvin, enter in his personal information, and then enter in each of his income statements. The majority of us are good to move on. Great. Okay. All right. So you should be able to see my screen. I'm on the income section of TaxSlayer for Calvin's return. So you should have everything entered in. If you want to make sure you have similar numbers to me, I have everything entered in, including the 1099-R that we're adding. So this is what my summary looks like so far. The next thing that we're going to want to do from here, so this is, you know, with a new client, which will be most of the clients we're working with in the back tax program. The next thing that we're going to want to do is on the left-hand menu over here, select the 2024 amended return.
Can I stop you a second?
Yes.
We were supposed to enter the new information on that return.
If you didn't, that's okay.
Okay. But
So
that's what we should be doing?
So that's what I did. If you didn't do it, it's okay. I'll show you what extra step you'll need to do in the amended portion to add that information in.
Got it.
All right, so go ahead and select amended return, hit get started, and you'll see this menu here, this list of options. We don't really need to go over how to amend the return. We're doing that now. First thing that we're going to want to do is go to original federal information. And then you're taken to this screen where you need to put in the original information from Calvin's 1040. Remember, if he was a client that had seen us initially and the return was accepted, it would auto-populate. But because he's a new client, we have to manually do this. So if you go into your scenario, you scroll down, you'll see his original 1040 attached. So we'll just need to pull the information that it's requesting. So it's asking for his AGI. That's usually on line 11. I have $25,705.
How did you get that to that page? I'm sorry.
To this amended screen?
Yes.
So on the left-hand menu in TaxSlayer, select 2024 amended return.
Uh-huh.
Then hit get started. and then select original 1040 information. So the second option on the screen.
Original federal return.
Yep.
Okay.
And just start entering in the information as it appears. Please, if I'm moving too slow, go ahead and move ahead, enter in everything on here. I'm just going to go through each line.
So we have to have printed the return we just did.
Nope. So it's already been included for us. So we have that.
Oh,
in the
I see.
packet.
From the, okay, got you,
Yeah.
got you. Okay.
All right, next up, they're asking us for the standard itemized deduction. It looks like he took the standard, so that's on line 12. 14,600. Oops. Then next they ask for the tax. That's on line, I believe, 16. I have 1,113. Then they ask for credits. So if you're not sure where this is located, you can always click on the where is this located and it lets you know. So line 21. Line 21 is blank, so we can move on. Other taxes, let's take a look. Line 23 is also blank. Federal income tax withheld. If I look at his 1040, line 25D has 2203. So $2,203 for the federal income tax withheld. He didn't have any estimated tax payments. I don't think he was eligible. Well, actually, let's see. Was he eligible for EIC initially? No. Other credits. There were no other credits. So we can keep on moving down our list here. There is a mention here of overpayment. So he was supposed to get a refund of $1,090, but if you remember from the interview notes, he says he hasn't received that yet.
But can we put it in as if he did?
Yes, we can. We're gonna go ahead and assume that he'll get it because when we file this, or no, we should, I'm sorry. I don't think that we should put this in here because he hasn't actually received it. So if we put it in here, what will happen is, and I'll show you, we can look at this when we get to the printed return. It might have him owing back less than he's supposed to.
If we just went through entering all that information, why isn't it just pulling it over?
Because the return wasn't accepted. So
Okay, okay.
it'll only auto-populate if the return is from an existing client that we filed their return for them. Yes, it would be nice if it pulled over, but it doesn't. So for now, we're going to leave the overpayment blank. And I'll show you why. And then he's not self-employed, so there's no qualified business income deduction. We're not worried about this applying a refund to next year's estimated tax payments. And none of these boxes apply to him. So once you've entered everything in, go ahead and hit continue. And then if you've already entered in all of the income statements, including the missing 1099-R from his original return, the next thing that you're going to do is go to amend the state. But for Liz, what you're going to want to do is make corrections, and then you can enter in the 1099-R.
Got it.
All right, is everybody good to move on to the state amended portion? Liz, I know you have to enter in that extra 1099-R, but
That's
I don't
okay.
think that should take you too long. All right, I don't hear any objections, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the amended state portion. So next you should be back on the screen, select amend state return. And this is where we have like 1,000 clicks to tell Taxslayer that we really do want to amend the state return. So click on amend state. And then scroll down and hit amended return, begin. And then he was a full year resident, so we're doing a 502X. So do not do 505X. So click on begin for the 502X. and then it should take you to this screen. And this is very similar to what we did for the original 1040 information. There's several more screens, but you're just going to be entering in the information on the original return. So first, we're going to start with the general questions. They're asking, has the name or address changed from the original return? No, it has not. Was an extension requested? He did not request an extension as far as we're concerned. So we can skip the date as well. Is there an amended federal return being filed? Yes, we are filing an amended return for the federal. So change that to yes. These all default to no. Has the original return been changed by the IRS? As far as we're concerned, it has not been. And then filing status on the original return. It was single. All right, can move on to the next screen. So next you're going to need to put in the original information from the 1040. Again, this will not pull over. You're going to have to enter this in manually. So if I go back to a 1040, he had $12,280 of wages. Didn't have any interest income, no dividend income, no taxable state refund, alimony business. He didn't have any of this stuff. We did have retirement income. So that was $2,245. So under taxable pensions and IRA distributions, you can put $2,245. We pulled that from line 5B of the 1040. There was no rent or royalties, no farm income. We did have unemployment compensation. That should be on line 8. 11,180. Now you'll want to make sure that you're not confusing other income. So I know there's like this line 8 will report multiple types of income. In our case, it's all unemployment. But if there's ever multiple things being reported there, you'll want to look at the schedules. I didn't include the schedules from his return because that would have been way too many pages for you guys to scroll through. But in real life, you know, on a return, you'll have those additional schedules and you might need to reference those. In this case, we don't. All right, and there were no federal adjustments and there were no Social Security benefits. So we can move on. You should have wages, taxable pensions, and unemployment entered in on the screen. All right, next we'll need to enter in the information from the original Maryland return. So that's a few more pages down. It's page 14 in my packet. So page 2 of the 502 is where we're going to start. And they're asking for line 1B, earned income. I don't see anything there. Line 6, total additions. There were no additions to income. Line 15, total subtractions. I don't see any subtractions. Line 17, he got $2,700 for his standard deduction. And then exemptions, it should be 3,200, I think. Yes, 3,200. And that's on line 19. Remember, itemized deductions we're not doing unless the taxpayer itemized. He took the standard, so we're going to skip over itemized deductions and go to total tax next. So this will be on page 3. So the very last page in your packet. Maryland tax is $889. I don't see anything again until line 27, which they don't ask for. Let's look at line 28. $594 for the local income tax. Line 29, line 30, there's nothing there. All right, so really we only have to enter in line 21, Maryland tax of $889, and line 28 for the local income tax, $594. And hit continue, move on to the next screen, total payments. All right, line 40, we have $1,718. There's nothing on line 41 or 42 or 43. 48, there was an overpayment of $235, and he did already receive that, so we are good to put that in here. And then you can leave everything else blank. And then finally, an explanation of the changes. The reason for the federal amendment and the state amendment are the same. We're adding additional income, so we're just going to hit yes and have that pull over from the federal return. Let me hit continue. Is everybody good on the Maryland amended portion?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. So we're just going to hit back a couple times, hit continue, and then we're going to exit the Maryland return. And then we're going to go back to 2024 amended return on the left-hand menu. And now we're going to need to put in our explanation for the change. So can anybody give me a good explanation to put in here? Taxpayer received 1099-R after filing. Okay. Does anybody think we should add anything additional to that?
Should we put which 1099-R it is, or do they already know?
That's a good point. Yeah. I personally, when I do this, I'm extra. So I do put that type of information in. So I usually do say taxpayer receive additional 1099-R from Golden Age Retirement. They will be able to figure it out when it's attached, but I do put that on there. And yes, like Rob said, the line on the 1040 that changed. Notice up here, they're saying enter the line number for each item you are changing. So taxpayer received additional 1099-R from Golden Age Retirement after filing original return. And then I put something like added, I think it was 2,800. Put in the amount of income that we've added to the line. So $29,824, because we're rounding up, of, say, pension income to line 5. It should be 5B maybe. 8. $824. Does anybody have any questions about that? Or anything else that we've done up to this point? Okay, I don't hear any objections. So the next thing that we would do is just print the amended return. Because remember, we want to just make sure that everything looks the way it should, the way that we expect it to. So when you hit the print return, it should pull up the 1040X. And notice in column A, the original amount, it should match what's on the original return. So this is just what we entered in on that first screen. This looks good to me. What changed was the income. So we see that the AGI, we added $29,824 of income, and now the correct amount is $55,529. That maths to me. Standard deduction hasn't changed, so that looks good. And then they're just subtracting line 2 from line 1 here. And then the taxable income has increased. So it went from being this amount here, it increased by the amount of income we added, and now it's $40,929. Then we've also seen a shift in the tax. So the tax went up. It's now $4,679. Everything is looking good to me. And you'll see that he should have owed $62. So if we were to put that he got the refund, just click out of this. I'll just show you how that looks different on the amended return. So if I go back in here and say that he actually did receive the refund, I think it was $1,909. No, 1,090. So $1,090. And then I go back to print the return. Notice that it's saying that he owes even more. Because now it's saying that he owes the $62 that he was going to owe originally, plus the refund that he's received. So it is important, that entry is important. It does make a difference in the result of the return. So we want to make sure that whatever we're putting in the overpayment box or in the amount that has already been paid, that we're getting that correct, because it does change the result of the return.
I have a question, Kira.
Yeah.
So what happens if like we e-file this for him and then tomorrow he gets the check from the IRS? He should
That's
just
a
not
good
cash
question.
it?
That's a good question. So if we do this, right, and we don't put that amount in the overpayment and he gets that check, he should send it back
Okay.
to the IRS.
Got it.
Because he's not entitled to that refund.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, any questions on this amended return? How does everybody feel about the process of
Okay.
amending a return?
Okay, so
Yeah.
this is just for me. Okay.
Yes.
Since I did not put in the overpayment, okay, mine is saying that he only owes the $62. But if I would have put in that overpayment,
Mm-hmm.
that meant that he would have to send back not only the 1,990, but he would also be responsible for the other $62
That's correct.
for a total of 1152.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, I was always wondering whether or not we should put in that they doesn't make a difference, really.
Yeah. So yeah, it definitely makes a difference. And you know, sometimes taxpayers will have letters showing that the refund has been, you know, denied essentially.
Mhm.
So you just want to go based off whatever's on the return, and then if there's a letter, what's on the letter, if there's a shift in what's on the actual return.
Okay, thank you.
How do you
So
send
the-
a check back to the IRS?
That's a good question.
They can
You can
either
probably
pay
cash
for it
the,
through their ID.
yeah,
I know
you
I
could,
was told to do it through ID Me,
that's a
or they
good
could just
question. Hmm.
they could pay it either from their personal checking accounts or
But you mean, Liz,
from their credit card.
how do they send it back? If they
Right.
it.
I mean, I don't think taking a check and putting it in the mail is necessarily going to do the trick.
so
Yeah, so
I mean, if you take their, well, presumably it went into your account.
Right.
yeah. So if it came in the mail, then you do mail it back after you write void in the endorsement section, is what the IRS is saying. And you include a note saying return of erroneous refund. But if it was a direct deposit, then you can contact your bank and have them reverse it. I'm just reading this from the link I just sent. And then they want you to call the IRS to explain why the direct deposit is being returned.
Can I say something about
Yes.
the direct deposit? Having worked in the bank, they do not reverse it, they'll ask you to call IRS and ask IRS to pull it back.
Got it. Thank you, Maureen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for that background, Maureen.
And as someone who is currently in a battle with the DC Office of Tax and Revenue to get my tax refund, this process is going to take a long time for everyone. It won't be quick.
Yeah, even the
Well, let me-
reversal, it takes a long time.
Yeah.
The IRS doesn't just pull back the money. It takes a few weeks for them to take it back.
So frustrating. Okay. You'll see if you scroll down to the next page, we have our explanation that pulled over. So just always make sure that that's showing up. And then we'll scroll down to the Maryland return. So many pages. All right, so in my PDF, I've scrolled down to page 27 is where the state amended return starts. All right, so you'll notice here, the state amendment, it's similar to the federal. They have a column A with the original amount, B, column B is where the changes are being listed, and then column C is the correct amount. So everything is looking good to me here. We're seeing the shift in income, the increase in income from the added 1099-R. And then that has shifted, or that has impacted the Maryland tax. So the Maryland tax has increased. And then down at the bottom, you'll see that we listed that he did already receive the $235. So he does need to pay that back, plus the $71 that he would have owed had the return been done correctly the first time. So he owes a total of $306. Are any questions?
Is it okay from your experience on the Maryland amendment that it says line 5B, even though it's a different line on the Maryland return?
That's a great question. I think it's fine. I haven't run into any issues with that being on there. Since everything does pull from the federal return, I think.
And they get a copy of that anyway.
Yeah, they get a copy of that. Yes.
Okay.
I guess you could say line 5B of the federal return.
True. Yeah, you can make
Yeah.
that distinction as well. Any other questions? All right, do we need another quick break, or should we move on to the next scenario? All right, it is 2:10, so I think we should jump back in and move on to our next scenario. This was also emailed to you. It should be the Howard Hamden scenario. Please let Madison and I know in the chat if you don't have this. All right, so I'm just going to start working through, reading through the interview notes here for our next scenario. So you'll notice at the top, this is going to be a 2023 return. So this is a back tax year. And we have Howard, who is a hardworking single dad. He supports his college-age twin daughters, Hannah and Haley, who are attending the University of Maryland pursuing nursing degrees. Howard recently learned about the VITA program and got an appointment at his local VITA site to prepare his 2024 tax return. During his appointment, he learned that he could still claim his daughters as dependents even though they were over the age of 18. Last year, Howard used an online software to prepare his 2023 return, which charged him a moderate fee of $100. He wasn't aware he could claim his daughters and their education expenses on his taxes at the time, so he filed as single. He asked if his VITA site could amend the 2023 return, and he was referred to their back tax program to do the amended return. His original 2023 return shows a balance due of $1,241 to the IRS and $257 to the state of Maryland. He's provided all the necessary documents to do the amendment. The only IRS notice that he has received is a bill of the remaining balance plus interest. So it doesn't look like anything's been adjusted to the return. He just got a bill. He's not sure how much of the original IRS balance he has paid, but he knows he made at least one payment. The Maryland balance has already been paid in full. Howard and his daughters were insured through his employer all year in 2023 and 2024. And his daughters, Hannah and Haley, were in their third year of undergrad in 2023, and neither of them have a criminal record of any kind, nor have they filed a tax return. All right, so we have a few questions to answer before we get started. Based on the information provided by Howard in his interview notes, is a 2023 amended return needed, and why, if so? Does Howard have to do an amended return?
Only if he wants his money.
Yes. Thanks, Dan. So yeah, he doesn't have to do one, technically. The IRS is not going to come for him. The IRS is not going to say, hey, you forgot to claim this credit. Here's some extra money for you. So he has to take it upon himself to file the amended return. And it's something that he should be advised to do, because he's most likely going to get his money back that he's paid, plus maybe even some extra. All right, next question. Howard is not sure how much of his 2023 IRS balance he has paid. What documents can he request to help his preparer determine what has been paid already? Just think back to the transcripts. Does anybody know what type of transcript would have this information on it?
Account transcript?
Yep. Thanks, Dan. Yes, it is the account transcript. So the account transcript would have a record of any payments that have been made, any transactions that have occurred on his account. So he would want to request a 2023 account transcript. And after further discussion, Howard realizes he needs additional tax years to be amended. How far back can he go and still claim a refund? As of May 8th, 2025.
2022?
Yeah.
Yep. You are killing it, Dan. Thank you. Yes, 2022. 2022, 23, and 24, you can get amendments, or I'm sorry, refunds for. Anything prior to that, he cannot. Now, had this been during tax season, so before the April 15th deadline, he could have also gotten a refund for 2021. But we are past the April 15th deadline, so we're just limited to 2022, 23, and 24. Okay. With that being said, let's make sure we have all of our documents here. We have Howard's ID, his social, his daughter's socials. He filled out an intake form. We also have his W-2. Looks like that's the only income he has. We have his 1098T from Hannah, as well as an account summary, and then the 1098T for Haley. And then we have his original return. So I'm going to go ahead and let everybody prepare the return. It should be really quick. It's just one W-2. And then you can go ahead and put in the tuition statements for his daughters. Go ahead and just prepare the return as if you're doing it correctly the first time. So put in everything, mark his filing status as head of household. Make sure you're confirming that he can claim his daughters. We've already laid it out in the interview notes that he can, but typically you want to just make sure that he is eligible to claim them. And then once everybody's done with that, so I'll give you 20 minutes to do that, to put everything in, we will go ahead and amend the return. I'm going to go to the amended section. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so you should have already prepared the return as you would have normally had everything been provided the first time. So you should already have the filing status listed as head of household. Both dependents should be listed. If you went in and prepared this as a single return and only listed the W-2 so far, then you're gonna have some extra work to do. But I'm just gonna assume that everybody prepared it correctly. You'll need to click on amended, put in the original information. So I have his AGI is 65,800. He took the standard deduction for a single filer, 13,850 in 2023. His tax was listed as $6,742, and I can pull up actual return. I think I moved it to my other screen. Okay, nope, this is, yeah. Is this the, no, this is a return. Sorry, guys. Just give me 1 second. Here we go. All right, so on his original return, AGI 65,800, standard deduction 13,850. His tax on line 16 was $6,742. Federal income tax withheld was $5,501. That's on line 25D. And then he originally owed $1,241, but he only paid $241 of it. If you didn't get that, it was not in the notes. I put it in the chat. Remember in the notes, he wasn't sure, so I just had us assume that he got an account transcript and the one single payment that he's made so far was $241. So you put that in here. And then you'll check off that he's adding dependents. You do not need to type 2 here. If you do that, it'll think that that was on the original return. So you actually just check the box and leave this blank. And then hit continue. If you prepared this as the original return, if you just recreated the original return, you'll need to go and make corrections. I don't think anyone did it that way, so that's good. We'll go ahead and amend this. Yes.
So where in there, if you just tell it that none of the dependents counted, does it figure out that the original return was a single, or doesn't it care?
Yes, so if you leave it blank, it assumes that the original had 0. And so if you put 2 in, and I can show you guys when we print the return, if I typed in 2 there, it would say that on the original return there were 2 dependents, the change is nothing, and the correct amount is 2. So you just want to make sure you're leaving it blank. It's a little confusing the way they have it there. I always have to remind myself when I do the printed return, oh, you're not supposed to actually enter the number, the correct number there. You're supposed to enter the original amount.
And so the incorrect number would have been a 0, but you have to check the checkbox.
You have to check the box to
field count as
let
a
them
0.
know that
Okay.
there's a change. Yeah. Let the software know. All right, so we amend the state return. Click amended return. It's going to be a Maryland 502X because he was a full-year resident. General questions, everything defaults to no. The only thing that we needed to change to yes was that, yes, there is an amended return being filed. And then the original filing status was single. Then on the information from the original return, he only had wage income of $65,800. So that's the only thing you need to enter here. Then on the information from the original 502, his standard deduction was $2,550. That's on line 17 of the Maryland 502 on page 2. $2,550. And then the exemption, it was only him on the return, so it was $3,200. And that's on line 19. Remember, we don't do itemized deductions. He didn't itemize, so we leave that blank. We move on to the total tax. He had a Maryland tax of $3,001 and then a local income tax of $2,056. And that was on lines 21 and 28 respectively on page 3 of the 502. Then you hit continue. The payments. He had a tax withholding of $4,800. That's on line 40 of his Maryland 502. And then in the notes, it does say that he did make the full payment. So he paid the $257. So you should be entering that in here. And then for the explanation of changes, I just pulled it over from the federal. So I just clicked yes. And then that concludes the Maryland amended portion. We would then go back to the amended return. JIRA says it's line 6 amount 4203 not supposed to be added. Yes, it is. Thank you. I made a last minute change to this scenario and obviously didn't fix it. So yes, so JIRA is pointing out that on the W-2, there is an addition to income. There's the Maryland state pickup. So on the W-2 in box 14, there's Maryland State pickup of 4203. I want to make sure I actually put that on the W-2. Let me just check quickly. Okay, yeah, so I do have it on the W-2, but I need to pull it over to the amended return so that the software knows that that was in addition to the income on the original return. Right. Thank you, Hajira. Okay, so hopefully you guys put that on yours, but I need to go back and add that onto mine. Amended return, edit. Might be, I think it's on this part, additions. Okay. The next thing we need to do after the state amended return is complete is do an explanation of changes. I put a really long explanation in here. Because like I said earlier, I'm really extra. Let's see if I can expand this. So I have that the TP originally filed as single with no dependents. TP was eligible, TP means taxpayer, was eligible to claim his 2 daughters as dependents. Return has been amended to change the filing status to head of household, and both daughters have been added as dependents. TP is also eligible to claim American Opportunity Credit for both dependents. 1098Ts have been attached. Any questions on anything so far before we look at the PDF?
Can you copy paste that long explanation on the chat? I know, shortcut.
I can, I have it in all caps. Okay, 1 second, because I'm slow with the chat. Okay, there you go. All right.
Thank you.
Next thing we want to do, we want to print the return because, we always want to look at it, make sure we didn't miss anything, make sure everything is calculating correctly. Sometimes the software is on one. All right, so you'll see our original amounts here. This should just reflect what's on the original return. The biggest changes here were that his standard deduction increased because now he's had a household. So you'll see there's a difference here on line 2. It's now 20,800. So that's changing his adjusted gross income. And then his taxable income is less because he has a higher standard deduction. His tax is also less. This all makes sense. Nothing is, raising any red flags that I can see. The payments here, the income withholdings did not change. And then you'll see that on his original return, he had no refundable credits, but now he has the $2,000, $1,000 from each dependent for the AOC. And he paid $241 of his original tax. So we have that listed there. And now he's entitled to a refund. So he's getting back what he's paid to the IRS on top of what he should have received in the first place. Then you'll notice on page 2, the original dependents, remember you have to leave that blank. It's a little counterintuitive. But you'll see that there's a change. We've increased it by 2, and so the correct amount is now 2. And then his dependents are listed here, and then we have our explanation. Then for the state amended return, so the 502X, if we scroll down page 26 of our PDF, everything looks good to me so far. AGI. We have the addition that didn't change from the Maryland State pickup. There was a shift in the exemptions because now it's not just him on the return, it's him and his 2 daughters. So it's an increase of 6,400. Maryland tax has gone down. And we see that He was entitled to a refund, plus he paid money to the state of Maryland already, so he's getting all of that back. So it's a total refund of $716. And then you'll see the explanation has pulled over from the federal return. Any questions?
So he still had a letter from the IRS that had assessed penalties and interest and whatnot for his payment plan. Are they gonna, since now his return would have been a refund from day one, are they gonna reverse all of that? Is he gonna get all of those dollars back, or is he still on the hook for the interest?
No, he won't be on the hook for interest. If anything, the IRS might pay him some interest on the refund. But no, if he's yes. So if you looked at or let me finish answering Dan's question actually. So yeah, you want to just make sure that you're putting in what he's paid. If the IRS has sent him a bill, which they did for additional interest, they will reverse that. So to answer your question, Dan, yes. Hajira has a question in the chat. Were we supposed to add an additional $100 for each daughter for the qualified expenses? Yes, and I can pull up my 1098T entries. Get rid of this. So if you notice on the student account summary, if you just put in the information as it is on the 1098T, you'd be missing out on $100 for each dependent. The reason for that is because there's a nursing school fee that they were charged that isn't reflected in the total amount up here. So the way that I entered it, so many clicks. Okay, so $10,000 for tuition, $6,000 for scholarships, and then I have $1,000 for other qualified expenses. That would be the mandatory fees, so $450 for each semester, $900 total, plus the additional $100 for the nursing school fee. Any other questions? Are amendments starting to make sense? Do you guys feel comfortable? We have one more scenario.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good. Sonia's feeling good. What about everybody else? Jira, oh, let me pull up this chart. Hold on. You got line 16 incorrect. Is that on the federal or state? Hajira. Okay, that might just be the amount paid. So let me just pull up my summary real quick. And 16. Okay, so yeah, so in there, let me start from the top. The notes says that he owed $1,241, but only made one payment. He wasn't sure how much. So in the chat, when you guys were preparing the return, I just said to assume that he only paid $241 of the full balance. So that might be why yours is different. No, that's okay. All right. Any other questions? How's everybody feeling? I would like to hear from everyone.
Ish.
Okay. You're on the fence, Maureen.
Yeah.
Hajira, how are you feeling about it? Peter, Carolyn. Carolyn's good to go. Awesome. Okay.
I'm sure I will not be completing them at the same speed you're reviewing yours for a while.
That's okay. All right, it seems like for the most part, everybody is feeling good. I'm feeling all right so far, but definitely will need someone to check my first few amendments. Of course, yeah. So we still follow the same preparation, quality review process for amendments. So someone will definitely check over your work. I'm glad everybody is feeling better than they did coming into the training. Lucy's too kind. I'm not the goat, but thank you. All right, we have one more scenario that we can do. We have about 30 minutes left in the training. If we run out of time, that's okay. I actually didn't even expect us to get to this, so that's a good thing. So we have a third amendment scenario. It's for Terry Talbot. So go ahead and pull that scenario up. Let me get rid of Howard and exit this. We're going to be back in the 2024 software. So please make sure you change your tax year back to 2024. I'm doing that now so I don't forget later. And then go ahead and just pull up your third scenario for Terry Talbot. This should also have been emailed in the email that Madison sent. I'm going to go over the interview notes. We have Terry, a first-time filer. In mid-January, Terry filed her return herself online using a free software as soon as her W-2 was available online. Many of our tax clients do that in January. A few weeks after filing, this is a very typical scenario. Terry received an additional W-2 in the mail. She had only worked the job for a short time at the beginning of 2024 and had completely forgotten about it. Terry had no clue what to do and consulted her local VITA site. She was told that she may need to file an amended return and scheduled an appointment for mid-May. On the day of her appointment, Terry realized she misplaced her W-2s and called the office to ask what she should do. She was advised to create an online IRS account to get her wage and income transcript and visit her local comptroller office to get a state transcript if she wanted to be seen that same day for her appointment. Then we just have a few notes about the return. She had health insurance through the state of Maryland for free. She's not making any changes to her filing status or dependents. She hasn't received any letters from the IRS about the return. And she has already received her original refunds of $737 from the IRS and $734 from the comptroller. So a couple of questions to answer before we work on this return. Based on the information provided by Terry in the interview notes, is an amendment needed and why?
Yes, because of the income not reported.
Yes, there is income omitted and there's going to be a change in her income, so she should be doing an amended return. Our next question, Terry has provided us with a redacted wage and income transcript because she lost her original W-2s. Are we still able to prepare the return without the EINs?
Only if you have the state printout.
Yep. So an alternative when we're working with a redacted IRS transcript, the state transcripts will not be redacted. So those would have the EINs on them, assuming that the state information matches what's on the IRS transcript. So sometimes it doesn't. We also have our EIN search tool that we can use. So I'll pull that up and I'll share it in the chat. I have it bookmarked here. Chat. It's actually the same people who make the Bogart tool for the simplified method. So shout out to them.
I love those people.
Yeah. All right, and then our last option would be to Google. Sometimes, you know, if it's a big company like Walmart, you can usually Google the EIN. If it's like Uber, things like that, we can usually do a quick Google search and get exactly what we need. Some of these we work with so frequently, we might know it off the top of our head. I know maybe like some of the Maryland EINs, like the unemployment one. But yeah, we have a few options. If we cannot get the EINs from one of those three methods, what option are we left with?
Paper filing.
Yes, paper filing. If we don't have the EIN, the return will reject. So, you know, you can try to put in a dummy EIN, it'll just get rejected, so it's gonna have to be mailed. All right, great. That's all the questions. So we have the ID and social. We have the intake sheet completed here. We have a wage and income transcript. You'll see that it's redacted here. So you'll notice that, you know, the employer's name, we just have WAL. I don't know what that means. Usually we ask the taxpayers, do you remember where you were working during this tax year? And then we might give them these little hints to help them remember. Sometimes they have no idea. Other times they're like, oh yeah, in 2023, I was working here and here. And it's like, okay, and then we can work from there. You'll see that we only have the last four of the EIN. And then we have a second W-2 here. This is the one that was missing. AMAZ. So I used real life employers here just so that we can make use of the EIN search tool. I can tell you right now, this is Amazon and this is Walmart. All right, and then we have, this is not what the actual state transcript looks like, but it's close. They actually look a lot uglier than this because I don't know, their systems are just really outdated, but it prints out similarly. So this is the Maryland transcript. It can be a little bit hard to read at first, but eventually you do get a bit used to it. So we see the social security number. You see all the information is here. We have Walmart. We have the whole address. We have the EIN listed up here. And then it includes some federal information, but you know, not quite everything that's on the IRS transcript. And then we have the Maryland tax withholding. All right. Then we have the original return from 2024. So you can see that only the Walmart income was included. Amazon was left off. And we have the original state return. So I'm going to go ahead. We don't have that much time left, but please go ahead and start preparing this return. Again, it's in 2024. And then I'll say around 3:20, 3:15, 3:20. We'll come back together and just go over the return really quickly. All right. So when you started the return, you should have just prepared it as normal. So just including both W-2 information, the filing status will be single, that's not changing. It's really just an addition of a W-2. So assuming everybody did that part correctly, you just go to the amended section. This one's pretty straightforward. Original information on the return, for the AGI, it was 12,901. That's on line 11 of the 1040. Yep. Okay, she got a standard deduction, so 14,600. She did not have a tax liability, so we left that blank. Her federal income tax withholding was 737. That's on line 25D. And then she received a refund of, you know, her withholding, $737. And in the notes, it did let us know that she did actually receive that, so we can put that in here. And that's all you needed to do on this screen. Hit continue. We amend the state return. It's a 502X because she's a resident. Everything defaults to no here. All we had to do was change is an amended federal return being filed to yes. And then the original filing status is single. On the original 1040 information, there was only wages of $12,901. So that's all we needed to enter in on this screen. The original information from the 502, there was an amount in line 1B this time to calculate the earned income credit. It's $12,901. And you can see that on her 502. Line 1B has this amount listed. So you just want to make sure you put that in. There are no additions on line 6, nor are there any subtractions on line 15. And you'll notice that a standard deduction did not calculate for her. on line 17, which is fine. That's not an error. And then she's claiming herself. There's nobody else on the return, so her exemptions are 3,200, and that's on line 19. Again, she didn't itemize, skip that section. Total tax. She did not have a tax liability. She was eligible for earned income credit. And just remember, on the federal return, you have to be at least 25, but on the state return, you can be as young as 18 and still get it as long as you meet all the other requirements. She's a single filer. She made under the threshold for the EIC, so she is getting that on the state return. So that was on line 22, $433. And then we see another amount on line 29. That's the local earned income credit of 104. And then that's it for this screen. Then we go to the payments. You'll see on line 40, she had withholdings of 301. And then line 42, the refundable earned income credit, $433. And then she did receive her refund of $734. So we just want to make sure we put both those things in. And then I pulled over my explanation from the federal return. So I just clicked yes here. And then if we go back to the federal amended screen, you'll see my explanation says, taxpayer received additional W-2 from Amazon after filing original return. Wage income of $1,872 was added to line 1 of the federal return. W-2 is attached. And then, as always, we want to just print the return. Oh, and really quickly, if you don't mind, I'm just going to show you. Let's say that the state transcripts, we weren't able to use that. The EIN search tool. So there's a hyperlink in the PowerPoint, the slides, which will be available to you, but also I did put the link in the chat. Let's say we search, we know that she worked at Walmart. If I search that here, you'll see Walmart Stores Inc. There's the EIN. Let me just make sure those last 4 match what's on the wage and income transcript. So I have 6821. If I scroll to her transcript from the IRS, you'll see that we have a match. So 6821 for Walmart. And that's here. So that's also another option that you have. I just wanted to point that out. All right. Let's pull her return back up. I think it's this one. Okay. So we have the 1040X here, the federal amended return. Notice that column A is what was on the original return. There was a change in income here. So we see the increase of the Amazon income being added in. And then there's the standard deduction, which didn't change. And then you'll notice that she went from having no taxable income to $173 of taxable income because of the added income. And this changed her tax from 0. She had no tax liability to a tax liability of $16. All right, so you'll notice that she received a refund of $737. But she received more than she was supposed to. So she has to pay back $9 to the IRS. And because she's filing in May, there's probably going to be a little bit of interest tacked onto that. But that's not something that we worry about calculating. The comptroller will do that, or I'm sorry, the IRS will do that, and they'll send her a bill. So she's going to owe $9 now. My explanation popped up, so we're good there. And then if we move down to the state, so the 502X. All right, here we go. You'll see the increase in income from the added Amazon W-2. Exemptions stay the same. That's really the only change here. And then that just throws off the calculations a little bit. So previously she was getting the earned income credit. She's still eligible for that, but it's being used to reduce her tax liability. So it's no longer a part of her refund. And so she ends up only being eligible for a refund of 301. So the correct refund should have been 301, which was just her withholdings. But now, since she received the original refund of 734, she has to pay back a portion of the refund, $433. Sucks to have this experience your first time filing, but hopefully she'll learn to wait till she gets all her documents. Any questions? And you'll see my explanation did pull over down here from the federal return. Does that make sense? Anybody? That last scenario help with understanding the transcripts a bit better? You will work with wage and income transcripts quite a bit, especially for prior year returns. Hajira, yes. Did you have a question, Hajira? Oh, okay. Thumbs up. All good. All right, so eventually, we will add these slides and the recording and the scenarios to our resource page here. So we will let you know as soon as that's ready to go. You will also probably get an email from Madison letting you know when that's ready, or at least she might send you the recording. And then if you guys have any questions about back taxes, we start next week. If you have any issues, do we need to be concerned? I have a question from Carolyn. Do we need to be concerned if amended amounts send someone way over the income limits for VITA? That's a great question. It depends. So typically the way that we operate is if someone's in scope for the current year, so for 2024, we don't really, I don't want to say we don't care, but we'll ignore if they're over income for prior years. So if an amended amount brings them way over income for the current year, then we may decide not to assist them. But if it's for a prior year, then we might disregard that. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. Does anybody have any questions about the back tax program, amendments, or signing up for volunteer shifts? I know a lot of people have had issues signing up for shifts.
I was gonna say, if anyone does have issues signing up for volunteer shifts, please just let me know. The worst scenario and kind of like, well, I don't want to say worst, but I guess like the easiest thing for me is if you're just comfortable letting me know the days that you're planning on volunteering, I can go in and add in that information on the back end, so that we can get you on the schedule. But there are definitely shifts available. So just let me know, and thank you for your patience with the process.
Thanks, Madison. Yeah, I'm excited, you guys. I'm excited for back taxes to start next week, and I hope you guys are excited too. I look forward to seeing you guys. I really appreciate you all for taking the time to sit in and listen to this training, and just to give your time to the cash campaign. So thank you all.